let's take a look at the topics on homework number 1. The first topic is one-step equations with positive whole numbers. In this problem, they want us to find the value of x, and we're going to do that by using an inverse operation. So let's take a look at what we have. It looks like we have a statement that says that 2 is equal to the mystery number x divided by 6. So what we want to do is figure out what happened before we divided by 6. So in order to isolate this variable to figure out what x is, we need to perform an inverse operation. And the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So some people use a little x for multiplying. Some people use a dot for multiplying, but typically in high school we use parentheses. So I'm going to write parentheses on both the right and the left side of this problem because we need to be fair when dealing with equations, which means we have to do the same thing to both sides. And sometimes when we do it to one side, a number disappears. And sometimes when we do it to the other side, two numbers disappear, but they become a brand new value. So instead of taking a number and dividing it by 6, I multiplied both sides by 6. And that gives me my new answer, which is that x is equal to 12. And we're going to type that down here in the answer box. Up here in the right-hand corner is where you're going to see the symbol for how to get to the next problem. In our next problem, looks like we're subtracting 10 from our variable. So what we want to do is the opposite of subtraction, which is addition. And don't forget, whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. These 10s will disappear, but over here, you're going to get a 28. Up here in the right-hand corner is where you'll see the button for the next problem. Let's try this one last time. In this problem, 8 and x are secretly multiplying each other together. So the opposite of multiplying is dividing. And in high school, we don't use this symbol. We use the fraction bar, where there's a number on the top and a number on the bottom. It's kind of what these things are, placeholders. So we're going to divide both sides always by the number that's next to the letter. So we're going to divide both sides by 8. And that will give us a value of x equals 3. Alright, I think we're ready to take a look at the next topic. The next topic is one-step equations, but with decimals this time. You may need a calculator for this situation, but if you don't have your own, you can use one in the lower right-hand side of Delta Math. Just like the last topic, whatever operation you see, you're going to perform the opposite operation on both sides of the equal sign. So instead of dividing x by 9, I'm going to multiply both sides by 9. That's going to cause these two to cancel out. And now all I need to do is open my calculator and multiply 9 times 3.6. So I'm going to open the Delta Math calculator. I'm going to type 9 times 3.6. You'll notice over here on the far right is where the answer is, 32.4. Now I'm going to X out of this calculator, and I'm going to type my answer in this box. Alright, let's try it one more time. This one again is also a multiplying problem. I'm going to multiply both sides by 9. I'm going to open my calculator. I'm going to type 9 times 7.5. 67.5. Alright, For this third question, it looks like I have a constant this time, not a coefficient. So the inverse operation would be to subtract 13.8 from both sides. Pick up your calculator and type 15.5 minus 13.8. Look to the right and see the answer is 1.7. Let's move on to the next topic. One-step equations using addition or subtraction. Now here we have some integers. So I see here that a -2 has an opposite of +2. If you're going to use the Delta Math calculator, you need to know that the negative sign is the same as the subtraction sign. So when I go to type -6, I'm going to type subtraction sign 6 and then a +2. Look over on the right, the answer is -4. So I'm going to type a -4 equals C. Let's try this again. Find your variable first. Whatever's on the same side as the variable has to be gotten rid of. Don't forget, whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. So I'm going to add 10 and add 10. Pick up your calculator and compute. Let's try this one more time. Find your variable, find the constant that's next to it, and compute the opposite. The inverse operation is to subtract 10. Now be careful here. You have a -2, subtract 10. -2, subtract 10. That's all that you type in your calculator. Let me show you. -2, subtraction 10. Now be careful. You don't want to type -2 minus -10, because that will give you a completely wrong answer. So, -2, subtract 10. That's it. -12 is the answer. Let's move on to the next topic. This time, we're going to use multiplication to solve multiplication as our equation. So I have a multiplication problem. And the inverse of multiply is divide. So instead of using this symbol, we're going to use just a big fraction bar. The number that goes underneath the fraction bar, the number you're dividing by, is always the number that's multiplying the letter. So if I want to get rid of a times 3, I divide by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4, so I type that in the answer section. Again, this is a multiplication problem. The opposite of multiplication is division. The number that goes underneath is the coefficient, exactly the same as it is. -6 divided on both sides. That's going to give us -3. One last time. Find the variable, find the coefficient, perform the opposite operation. -3 is our answer. Oops. Now let's take a look at the next topic, which is one-step equations that have a division sign in them. If you have a division sign already in your problem, then you're not going to use division to solve it. You're going to do the opposite operation of division, which is multiplication. And now we show multiplication with parentheses. What are we multiplying by? Whatever is dividing a. So if it's a negative 10, we write negative 10. These two cancel, and then we compute. Let's try this one more time. When you have a division sign, the inverse operation is multiplication. Use parentheses, write what you're multiplying by, and then compute. One last time. Find the variable, find the coefficient, perform the inverse operation. And that's it. All right, let's take a look at these last two sections. This one is a one-step equation that has a fraction as a coefficient. And that's different than this, right? This is different. So I want you to know that if your letter, your variable here, is in the fraction, you're allowed to take it and push it off to the side. Right, so anytime you have a variable in the numerator, you can push it off to the side like this, but you can never put it in the denominator. Now we know that the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we could write it this way, but it's very complex looking. And the reason we don't write it this way is because there's a rule. When you divide by a fraction, you actually multiply by the, do you know the phrase? Reciprocal, also known as the flip. So instead of dividing by 5/4, we are going to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to use parentheses to show multiply, then we're going to take this fraction and we're going to flip it over. And that means the b will be all by itself. Now 2 times 4/5 can either be computed mentally or you can open the calculator. 2 times 4, and then you have to use the division bar to make a fraction. 2 times 4/5 is 1.6. So we're going to type that here and click submit. One more time. When your variable has a fraction as a coefficient, you multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Just take that fraction and flip it over. For those of you that want to move a little faster without a calculator, you know that when you multiply a number times a fraction, only the tops multiply the tops, right? Numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator. If there's only one denominator, it will stay the same. So now I'm going to write it as a fraction, because if I computed that as a decimal, it would be pretty messy. And I believe the Delta Math calculator would give it to you as a fraction as well. 22 times negative 2/3. Well, it's giving it to me as a decimal here. Now it's important to know there isn't really a 7 there. That 7 at the end is there because it's rounding up. So they may want your answer as a fraction. Negative 44/3. All right, the last section asks us to put these two things together. How do you get rid of a constant? How do you get rid of a coefficient? And that's called a two-step equation. it doesn't matter who you get rid of first. You can either undo multiply by 3, or you can undo adding by 2. But most students like to get rid of the adding and subtracting first. Watch your signs. Once you have gotten rid of your constant, you can move on to the coefficient. Don't forget the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide by 3, and I'll get my final answer. Now real quick, if you wanted to divide by 3 at the beginning, it's important that you know you have to divide the whole side. So you can either write one giant fraction bar, or you can write 3 tiny ones. You're allowed to divide by 3 first if you want, but you have to divide everything by 3. And these are not pretty. 2 divided by 3 is not even. Negative 10 divided by 3 is not even. So that's why sometimes it's smart to get rid of the constant before you start dividing. And that concludes homework number 1.